Minanaakwhe, Myiingan Minanaakwhe, Anishnabek, Miude Giwed Nong Nakeeng Miude Bin Jamayan, Kuchimnising Asian Kadek and Nis. Hello, everyone. I am from the Eagle Clan, and my name is Myiingan Minanaakwhe. That's my Anishnabek name, my English name. My Indian name is Jeff Monague. And I'm from the island that you can see across the way from this territory. And it is Christian Island today. But we know it as Gachimnising. And that's where I grew up. I'm going to tell you a story today. The story is a story that's been told for literally thousands and thousands of years as our people lived in this territory. It's longer than anybody can remember. Pico Melja, longer than anyone could even consider to remember. But those stories have been passed on from generation to generation, and they are stories that are told in order to help young people to figure out life. And this is such one of those stories here that I'm going to tell you. And it's a story of that involves a Thunderbird. There are many stories about the Thunderbird, and the Thunderbird in our culture is considered to be a real thing. It's considered to be a living thing, and the stories that we tell of them are also living things. These stories are living things. They are not myths. They are not. They're not legends. They are real stories, and that's why we use them. And so the story I'm going to tell you involves the Thunderbird that was in this area, and it was a long, long time ago. So, so that's why I'm going to tell my story. So it goes like this. Melja Goyopi. This happened a long time ago. And it was long before the world was the world that we have today. And it involves the Blue Mountains that we see here. And it was back when the mountains were high and jagged and rocky, just like the mountains that we see out in British Columbia. But over time, it's been eroded down to what we see today, to the hills that we have today. But long before that, when the Anishnabek lived in this territory, there was a lake that came through this area as well. But it was always understood that there was a Thunderbird, Nimki Benese. He lived high up atop the mountains. And it was higher than anybody could see. Most of that time, those mountains were covered with clouds, so you couldn't see up into the top. But you could hear the rumbling of the Thunderbird each and every day. And people were always told that they should never go to see this Thunderbird. They should never go there. Otherwise, something bad could happen to them. Even death if they looked upon the Thunderbird, or if the Thunderbird looked upon them. So they were always warned of it. Well, one day, there were two young men who were fishing along the shores. And they were far from home. And they heard the rumbling in the mountains, so they became curious. And they told themselves the stories that they had heard over time about the Nimki Benese, the Thunderbird. And they remembered how they should never look upon this bird. And they asked themselves, did that ever happen? Did it really ever happen that anyone went to see these Thunderbirds, and whether these stories were actually true? That if you looked upon them, something bad would happen to you? So, after much discussion, they decided that they would climb this mountain. So they paddled their canoe, and as they got closer to the mountains, they noticed that it began to rain, and there was an extra bit of rumble coming from the top. One of them became scared, and he said, "We should turn around and go back. We can't be here. We need to go back." But there was the first one the older one, who was determined. He wanted to see this. So they began climbing the mountain. And it took them about a half a day. When they got closer, they could feel the rumble even more. And the younger one became terrified because the rumble seemed to come through his body as he climbed those mountains. But the older one was determined, and he was further ahead. And he said, "Come on, let's go. Nothing will happen." As they got higher, at that point that they got higher, what happened was that the clouds began to give way, and the day began to clear up, and the rumble had stopped. Just then, they stopped to look up, and they could see just out of the corner of their eye, they could see something at the top, and it was very large. The younger one remembered the stories, and he decided that he wasn't going to look, but the older one was determined. He said, "I'm going to go see what that is." And he climbed even further up into the hill, up into the mountains. When he got closer, the Thunderbird sensed that he was there at that point. And one of the Thunderbirds came over and looked over the edge of the mountain. And he looked down at the young man. He looked down at the older man. And then he shook, and everything rumbled. He shook so loudly and so violently that the older man looked up to see the Thunderbird. And he was amazed at what he could see. This beautiful, immense creature was so beautiful. And he was just so amazed at what he saw that he took a step backward. And when he took a step backward, he fell down the mountain. And he died. The younger man heard him fall, and he heard him scream on his way down. And he did the right thing. He didn't look at the Thunderbird. All he said was that he was sorry for having been there, and that he respected the Thunderbird. And he said, "Miigwech," to the Thunderbird, which in English translates as "thank you," but in the literal sense in our language, in Anishnabek, it actually means that you have given enough, that we are respectful of you. So what happened next was the young man climbed back down without looking back up again. But as he neared the bottom of the mountain and he went to retrieve his friend, he heard this loud, thunderous roar as the Thunderbirds decided that they would leave this territory. And so they did. They left this territory after what had happened on that day. And the young man went home and he told his story. And that story has been told for generations now. This is a story I'm telling you. And he told the story that the Thunderbird, as it left, gave him the message that he would only come back every now and then. And he would come back to make it rain and to make it thunder. And when he came back, the people would know that he was there. But before he left, he offered the young man, he dropped a pipe, a sacred pipe, at the feet of the young man. And that sacred pipe stayed with the people. And whenever they needed to have their message carried to the Creator, they prayed through that sacred pipe. And the Thunderbird heard that message and took it to the Creator. And every now and then they will come back, but we can't look upon them. Just like the young man long ago. So that's a story that took place here, right at these mountains, a long, long time ago. And it's a living story. I'm glad you came to listen. I say again, Miigwech, I am Myiingan Minanaakwhe. Thank you for listening.